Happy to be back in Halifax on unceded Mi'kmaq territory, and yeah, I used to live here, and always happy to come back. My name's Dru Jay. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Public Services. And before I talk about any more about that, sorry, there's the music. Before I talk about any more of that, I was hoping I could get everyone to stand up. All right. So I'm going to give you a two-part, it's kind of complex, but two-part instructions. Just listen to the end, and then I'll say go, and then you go. So here's what you do. Find someone in the room that you don't know, and then go over and introduce yourself. And then you're going to have like a 2-minute discussion about the following 2 questions. What is Canada Post? And what does it have to do with the environment? What is Canada Post? And what does it have to do with the environment? Find someone you don't know, discuss in 2 minutes. Go! Does anyone want to share what they learned from their new friend? In just a few words, just 1 or 2 words. Yeah, what do you got?
I learned from Gordy, I noticed that Canada Post is the largest fleet of vehicles in the country.
Yeah.
I did not know that. No.
Sure.
We really like to get around.
All right, anyone else? What is Canada Post and what does that have to do with the environment? Simple questions, interesting answers. Yeah, what do you got?
Well, right now, they have a very small ecological footprint that we have with the door-to-door delivery and that one-on-one contact that we're losing so much in the technological era. Yeah. But the way this government wants to move, we're going to have more cars on the road, creating a greater ecological impact, more greenhouse gas emissions, lessening the impact or lessening the one-on-one connection with members of the community. And it seems like this government did not take into consideration disabled people, elderly people, you know?
Absolutely.
Pushing your wheelchair through a snowbank is great exercise.
All right, thank you for that. Anyone else? Any other ideas? Yeah.
I didn't learn from our discussion, but I did learn from this little book.
Okay.
The argument that door-to-door delivery is actually environmentally better than having consolidated post boxes where recipients have to, in many cases, probably drive to the box to pick it up. So you're getting all these more vehicle journeys than you would get if you're delivering door-to-door.
Yeah, I just learned from the brother here who said that there's, I think it was in Spryfield, they used to have 12 or 15 people going door to door, and now they have 12 trucks doing that instead. So they spend more money on gas, and they've been moving towards spending more money on gas and trucks and less money on human beings. Anyone else? Yeah.
I was actually quite surprised to find out that Canada Post has 22 vice presidents. That seems bad to the environment as well. So we should get rid of a few of those and bring back door-to-door delivery.
Great, thank you. One more maybe? Before I launch into my spiel. I know there's somebody out there. Yeah, all right.
I learned from my friend here that the number of post offices around, in rural communities, and how invaluable those structures are.
Right, and in what sense?
Well, because they're there and they could be used for they're well built and they're not spacious, but they have space, and they can be used for multiple purposes.
Indeed.
We also talked about banking too, Postal.
Right. Great. Thank you. So I'm just going to run and turn off the light. Is the light okay with you, or how does that work? Do you?
Yeah, if the lights are out completely, I'm going to have a hard time seeing the interpreter.
Okay.
We can see the screens from back here.
You can see the screens okay from back here? I can't see anything, so I'll trust you.
Postal gives them a liver.
No, I don't think so. I wasn't able to figure it out. If somebody can figure it out, I'm more than happy for you to do that, but I wasn't not able to. I just made them flicker a lot. All right, so to get started, yeah, if anyone wants to fiddle with the lights, please feel free, but I have not had any luck. So yeah, I just wanted to start with a few words about myself. So like I said, my name's Dru Jay. I'm the yeah, that's going to turn the whole thing off, and that's going to turn that on. So.
What if you turn off the first one and put that second one on?
Is that going to work?
Yeah.
Can you see the screen?
That works.
Better?
Try it. Try it.
It's better. Definitive it's better, and somewhat not definitive it's better. All right, we'll go with that. Thank you. So yeah, I just want to start with a few words about myself. I've been involved in kind of a lot of different activism, a lot of environmental justice work, working with communities downstream from the tar sands, working in solidarity with Indigenous communities, protecting their sort of land rights, and also anti-austerity organizing. I live in Montreal, so you may have seen the huge demonstrations with 200,000 people in them. That was definitely not me organizing. We were more the 200 people in a snowstorm in February variety. So in my 20s, I hitchhiked across the country a number of times. I've been on a bunch of different tours for various reasons. Spent a lot of time between Vancouver and Halifax, and even on Newfoundland, standing by the side of the road with my thumb out, trying to look friendly. But moving up in the world nowadays, I'm touring across the country, talking about delivering community power in the relative luxury of a packed Greyhound bus. So this tour is in some ways about bringing all of these things that I've sort of been doing off and on together. Postal workers have put forward a vision that addresses wealth inequality, that provides solutions to the climate crisis, and meets some of the needs of Indigenous communities all at once. It's the kind of full package. And I think that if we can get 54,000 postal workers together with environmentalists, together with anti-austerity activists, together with Indigenous communities, then we start to see the shape of an alliance that can accomplish some really big things. And I think big things that can go way beyond what any one of those groups, or even two of those groups, could accomplish on their own. And that's why I'm really excited about this sort of this vision that the postal workers have put forth in conjunction with a few others. So my current position is the Executive Director of Friends of Public Services. So we're an organization that started about a year ago. And I don't know if you kind of have to go into a mental time machine. It seems like ages ago, but back in July 2015, it seemed like the Conservatives could win another term. And so preoccupied with this, and also with kind of an interest in building the case for public services in general, we realized through talking to postal workers, among others, that there are lots of people who had lost their door-to-door delivery who had also voted Conservative in 2011. But a lot of them were not making the connection necessarily. There were people who had Conservative candidates' lawn signs on their lawns right next to Save Canada Post lawn signs, which was problematic. So we created a pamphlet, this thing, which you may have seen around. It's called "Conservative Cuts or Door to Door, Your Choice." So it makes the connection pretty clear. And then it also, on the inside, it kind of goes into more of an analysis of public services and why they're good, not only for increasing the quality of life and providing services for everybody, but creating good jobs. They're actually one of the best mechanisms we have for redistributing wealth in our society, in addition to many other benefits. So we printed about 100,000 of these and distributed them across the country, most of the time in partnership with postal workers who were obviously very motivated to get rid of the Conservative government. So after the campaign was over, we didn't necessarily get the exact electoral result we were looking for, but the Conservatives are gone, so now there's a lot of questions. The Conservative era, the post-Conservative era presents a whole new set of challenges. How do we keep up the momentum without the sort of Harper boogeyman that we always used to invoke to get people involved in this stuff, and how do we make real gains in the era of the Trudeau Liberals? So this got us into a kind of a philosophical mind frame. So we started to think about, okay, what is this thing that we're defending, Canada Post? Like, what does it actually consist of? And as we discussed this, we realized that it's quite a bit more than just letters, stamps, parcels, Wayne Gretzky commemorative coins, and so on. It's got a lot going for it. So the first thing that Canada Post is the biggest and most comprehensive logistics network in Canada. So you have depots, trucks, vans, post offices, a really huge, sophisticated network that can move pretty much anything from anywhere in the country to any other place in the country. And it's a public service. It's owned by the public, and so we can do anything we want with that, really, if it's in the public interest. And I think we have to keep that in mind. There's, the sky's the limit in terms of if there's anything in the public interest that involves moving things from one place to another. Canada Post is there for that purpose. The second thing that Canada Post is the biggest retail network in the country as well. So there are about 3,500 Tim Hortons across the country, but there are 6,200 post offices. So by any standard, that's a huge amount of post offices. And it's also a huge amount of retail space, a huge amount of square footage that can be used, again, for anything in the public interest, whether it's delivering additional services, whether it's pop-up shops for local businesses, whether it could be any number of things that we could do with that space, as long as it's in the public interest.
Can I ask a question about that?
Maybe just at the end. Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to try and cruise through this part, and we will have a lot more discussion at the end. So finally, what Canada Post is the most powerful marketing force in the country. There are lots of different marketing agencies, TV stations, newspapers, radio stations, but none of them can say, if you want to reach if you want to sell an idea, or if you want to sell a product, or if you want to get some information across, none of them can say, we can reach every single Canadian household. That's something that only the Postal Service can say. And lest I belabor the point, it's a public service, and we can do anything we want with that incredibly powerful information distribution tool. So, revealing the limitations of my technology here, but this is a photo of a postal worker at a climate conference in 2009 in Copenhagen. But in any case, while we were having these discussions, there were some postal workers who were at the climate discussions, or the climate conferences that were happening in Paris this last fall. And a lot of things were going on there. Some of the main things were, one, that people were sort of being reminded, and obviously everybody's aware that climate change is a thing, but I think climate conferences are often a kind of an occasion to look into the state of the art, the science, and all that, and realize that it's actually a really dire, serious crisis that we're facing among all the other crises. If we don't get, basically the scientific consensus, if we don't get off fossil fuels, more or less completely by 2030, things are looking pretty grim indeed. So that means a massive transformation of our entire economy and the entire way that we transport goods, services, people, all those things around. So that sort of gave us our answer. What would we want to use this hugely powerful network for? And addressing climate crisis seemed like a natural. And from this point, we realized that postal workers have actually been talking about this for ages. Since the 90s, they've been talking about environmental measures. They've been talking about postal banking for decades as well. But what hadn't necessarily happened was that all that was put together into a vision to talk about how Canada Post can address the climate crisis. So, how can we use Canada Post to address the climate crisis? A few different ways. So, the most obvious way, I think, is to green the fleet when we don't convert it to, letter carriers walking around on foot. So minimize the use of the fleet, first of all, by using human beings who walk around instead. And then also electrify all the vehicles. We could get unionized workers in Canada to make electric vehicles or hybrids to start the transition to a zero carbon delivery system and logistics system that can move anything across the country. And this is an achievable goal. This is a photo of Norway's new parts of Norway's new postal fleet. They've been ordering hundreds of new electric vehicles and converting gradually their entire postal fleet to electric vehicles. And so this would have benefits that go beyond just having less emissions coming out of the Postal Service. It would also create a network across the country of charging stations that would jumpstart the adoption of electric cars, because all of a sudden, if you have let's say a charging station in front of every post office, all of a sudden you can say, and with confidence, that if you drive your electric car across the country, in every place that you go, there's at least one place that you can charge your electric car, which kind of changes the feel of it, and I think could jumpstart adoption of electric cars, which is pretty necessary at this point. So the other thing, the other way that the Postal Service can address the climate crisis is postal banking. So there are kind of two existing cases that CUPW, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, has been making very forcefully and well, and they are basically that postal banking could be a boon to isolated communities where either there was never a bank in the first place, or and I've actually passed a number of communities on my travels across Ontario, for example. There are about 4 different communities where banks have actually closed their branches in the last year or two, and that actually has a wide-ranging effects on the community, because people, if they have to drive 2 hours to go do their banking, then they also end up kind of running other errands, and they end up going to Walmart, or they end up going to different stores in those places, and local businesses suffer as a result, and so it can actually have compounding effects on the life of communities. But the good news is that a lot of these places, even if they don't have banks, they have post offices, and if we instituted postal banking, which is something that Canada had until 1968, when the big banks decided that they didn't want it anymore, and many countries have implemented, these post offices could easily become bank branches. And bank branch is not just another one of these banks that are making $35 billion a year while inexplicably raising fees at the same time, but they could be a part of a publicly owned bank that actually benefits the public and actually works in the public interest. Novel as a concept as that is. And so the other benefit of postal banking would be to provide services to low-income communities who are woefully underserved by the current banking regime. Banks are actively setting their price structures and their fee structures to drive low-income people away, or prevent them from getting accounts in the first place, And so there's an estimated 1 million people in Canada who are underbanked, who don't have access either to a local bank branch, or don't have access to affordable banking, or don't have access to affordable credit. And so often people end up using check cashing services and payday loan services when they need a cash advance, or they need, their car breaks down and they can't cover their rent, so they need to get a little extra liquidity. And then they often end up paying like 500% interest, or even just to access their own money. People often end up paying up to 15 to 20% in fees, and so you end up with the people making the least money paying the most money just to access their own money, which is kind of an absurd scenario. So postal banking could also address this by providing, not profiteering, but simply providing useful services that turn a profit for Canada Post, but also put the payday lenders out of business, basically. And so that's the existing case for postal banking, but I think postal banking could go a lot further, in the sense that if you have even a fraction of 6,200 post offices across the country turning into banks, then all of a sudden you have a financial institution that's publicly owned, that's rooted in those communities, that actually has a ground level view of what could be done, and they could provide a whole series of financial products that could jumpstart the transition to a zero carbon economy. So they could fund, we could finance people to put solar panels on their rooftops. We could finance people to install energy efficient retrofits. We could use the postal bank to finance new green businesses and more local economic development. And the net result of this could be thousands of jobs across the country, as well as a rapid transition to the zero carbon economy. So finally, the next we have, we've heard from a lot of different postal workers across the country about how, I think when people, resist the sort of cuts to door, there's something more to it than just the convenience of getting your mail to the door. And anybody who's a mail carrier, I think, knows this pretty intimately, but it bears repeating. Mail carriers do all kinds of things that go way beyond delivering the mail, including being the sort of eyes and ears in their communities. There are countless stories of postal workers, coming across people who are having a medical crisis or something, and being the people who sort of are the de facto first responders who can call for help, or or even the more mundane versions like finding lost pets, or finding kids who the parents are worried about them, and helping out with little things. I've heard of post letter carriers carrying the garbage down the lane on days when it's icy, stuff like that. Groceries, yeah. So it's pretty extensive, the extent to which the postal workers have become sort of part of the fabric of their communities, part of the social fabric that makes up our communities. And so I think that there's a greater sort of unacknowledged value that exists in that I think people are responding to when they get really angry about their cuts the door to door. And I think it's worth making that explicit. But beyond that, I think that there are also ways that this could provide revenue, in the sense that in Japan, for example, you have postal workers who, for a small fee, you can have a postal worker check in on somebody, a loved one who's maybe an elder or has lower mobility, and just to have them knock on the door, check in, say hi, see if they need anything. So they have that actual face-to-face human contact at least once a day. And they also have somebody who can respond to their needs and deliver things. instead of having more screen-based interactions. So there are potential revenue opportunities, and they don't end there. And so the final category that I want to talk about briefly is food. So I think there are all kinds of possibilities. This is the least sort of explored version, and I think it probably looks different in every different community. Some places have a very well-developed sort of community-supported agriculture system already in place. Other places have very little, and could, Canada Post could play a role in sort of scaling that up. It's not clear what this will look like, but I think if we take local food and food sovereignty in general as a goal that's in the public interest, and then we ask the question, okay, how can we put this massive marketing system, this highly sophisticated network of depots, trucks, and daily delivery, and how can we put all this retail space to work for the local food system? I think we find lots and lots of answers. And I think this gets at what the direction we want to go, which is we don't just want Canada Post to be run in a top-down way by the latest person that the Prime Minister selects. We actually want the people who know their communities, so the postal workers and the people from the communities themselves, to be involved in talking about how we can use this public service to our maximum benefit for the things that we consider to be in the public interest. That said, you can't really see it, but this is a you can see it. Okay. There's a $26 jug of orange juice. So in communities in the far north, especially, are really getting hit hard by food insecurity. So in a lot of places, you have something called the Northern Store, which is, if you're not familiar, is a store that has outlets in these sort of isolated communities across the far north. In Nunavut, for example, in the Northwest Territories, or even northern Alberta, and basically they charge hugely inflated prices for their food. So back before the Harper years, we actually had a program called Food Mail that wasn't perfect and wasn't the best for everybody, but what it did was it provided the ability for people in the far north to order whatever food they wanted from the south, from anywhere they wanted the south, and get it shipped to them at a subsidized rate through Canada Post. This program was canceled by the Conservatives and replaced with a subsidy to the northern stores to provide affordable produce, the results of which you can see here. So lest anybody question, okay, maybe the northern stores have a huge amount of overhead, maybe they have a huge amount of different costs that they have to cover. Obviously, it's more expensive to run stores in these isolated communities. But all the information you need to know is in the salary of the CEO of the northern stores, which is $5.1 million. So that's $5.1 million is coming directly from some of the most vulnerable communities in the country, and this price tag. It's not a complete solution by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that if we want to talk about how the Canada Post network could be used to strengthen food security, food sovereignty, we can go. We could do a lot worse than to start by reinstating food mail. And one of the big problems with food mail back in the day was that you needed a credit card to access it. So conveniently, if we had postal banking and at financial services, you can solve both problems. Sorry, this is out of date. But it serves to highlight, thankfully, the small victories that we've been able to win so far. So yes, there was not a lockout on July 2nd, but there was a big fight about whether there would be a lockout, and the posties had won round one, which was pretty. The lockout has been delayed and then canceled. for the foreseeable. So negotiations are actually happening, which is new. Canada Post for a long time was basically just saying whatever it wanted and not really bothering to negotiate, and then poisoned negotiations by applying for conciliation, which set the clock ticking for the July 2nd lockout, which didn't happen. So in any case, this is now looming over our heads, and I think there's a huge risk here still, and there's a huge opportunity. The risk is that the narrative in the public eye will prevail that Canada Post is kind of a thing of the past. It's just letters and stamps. Nobody uses mail anymore. It's on the way out, et cetera, et cetera. The fact of the matter is, and this doesn't necessarily get out in the media, so we need to be vigilant about this, is that letter mail is gradually decreasing, in some ways staying steady, and parcels are going through the roof. Parcel delivery is a huge burgeoning business, and Canada Post is sabotaging itself by telling all its customers to go away, during the summer. And as I mentioned, there are a whole bunch of ways in which the Canada Post network could be used to expand services, to address the climate crisis, and so on. So I think we're at a sort of a divergence point where effort put into educating the public, mobilizing people, getting involved could have an outsized contribution, not only to the future of Canada Post, but to the kind of vision that we have of public services and what's possible in the public sphere. And we're really talking about starting the rollback of neoliberalism here. So there's a public review going on, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the lockout was supposed to happen at the same time as the public review, because Canada Post is doing everything it can to sabotage the visionary proposals that the postal workers are putting forward. So there's still a chance to submit to the review. Just if you just Google Canada Post review, you'll be able to, and we'll be sending out, if you sign up for our email list, we'll send out info about how to submit to the review. So that's a big thing to do. And then there's a parliamentary committee that's going to be forming in the fall that will be discussing these issues as well. And finally, the sort of verdict will come down about what we're going to do with Canada Post, supposedly before the end of the year. So we have a window in which not only, thanks to the sort of threat of the lockout, thanks to this threat of the lockout, there's a huge amount of interest, I think, above and beyond what there normally is in Canada Post. But at the same time, there's the opportunity to redefine its mandate and to expand it significantly. So now is the time to make that happen. So how do we make that happen? By participating in the review, but also by what we're proposing is and I think this is already happening potentially in Halifax, so we'll hear about that in a second. But we're in each place, so I've been in 10 cities so far, and in each place we're proposing that people start local committees to support the postal workers, but also to push for this this expansion of the public imagination about what we can do with our public services. So I just want to invite Tony up to maybe talk a little more about what's going on locally.
I will be brief. Because I'm sure everybody has lots of questions. My name is Tony Rogers. Currently, I'm the president of the Nova Local Canadian Union. Prior to that, I've done all kinds of things in my life, but I delivered mail for over 30 years for Canada Post, and this is actually the third union that I belong to. One of the unions that I belong to made itself irrelevant by not keeping ahead of the times and by not looking at what the social good is gained by the union movement and not portraying that properly to the public. So I don't believe that that's going to happen with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Canada Post first embarked on a plan to motorize things to death in 1994. They always had a problem with the modes of delivery that we had before. Prior to 1994, in all of Halifax, there were only 13 motorized routes. The reason those routes were motorized was because of the terrain that they delivered to, because of the vast expanse that they had to go through. It was impractical to walk 17 or 18 miles a day. So those were the motorized routes. Everything else was on foot. It was the cleanest mode of delivery in the world. Postal workers would go to a post office, they would sort their mail, prepare it, send it out in shuttle trucks, very few. There were only 45 shuttle trucks in the whole metro region. The bags would be delivered to those gray boxes that you'll see on the corner. Then they would walk out of the post office and get on a bus. And they would take a bus to their route. They would deliver their route, and at the end of their day, they would take the bus back to their route. The lowest carbon footprint you could have for any mode of delivery. The parcels were delivered, as I said, by a separate fleet, but they were larger trucks and they could cover vast areas. In '94, Canada Post decided it wanted to get away from that. So, of course, we had Donald Landers involved at the time, who was an ex-Chrysler hack. So they bought K-cars because that's the type of thing you want to deliver mail. And I'm not kidding, because you can't make this stuff up. So they bought K-cars and they sort of did it halfway. And so they said, well, there'll be 2 letter carriers per K-car. And one will go and drop the other one off, and the other one will walk traditionally as they did. Then the other person will deliver all the parcels for both routes, then park the K-car and have their mail in the K-car, and they will walk around and walk back to the K-car, then move it somewhere else. So in other words, they put a 4-cylinder engine in the gray boxes that were on the side. That's essentially what they did. But Canada Post, the one thing about management of Canada Post is the only thing they're consistent in is being inconsistent. So they did this in Dartmouth, and they rented a warehouse in Burnside. They closed 4 postal units in the metro area and moved them into the Burnside office, and they motorized the whole thing. Meanwhile, in Halifax, it was still the way delivery was done before that. So then Canada Post, not being satisfied with that, turned around and in 2011 had their vision of postal transformation, which was to literally put every delivery person in a vehicle. When I first started at Canada Post, there were 13 motorized routes in Halifax. There were over 150 routes. Now there are 7 foot routes in Halifax, and every other route in Halifax and Dartmouth is motorized. So it's a total departure from common sense. It's the most expensive thing in the world to run, is a greater fleet. So it's not even been done for profitable reasons, which is the hallmark of Canada Post. They don't do anything that even makes business sense. Even if you were just a mercenary capitalist, you wouldn't embark upon the business changes that Canada Post has done. So we've been trying to get that back. It's a substandard service. Centralized mail delivery might seem like a good idea in Florida. It's not a good idea in North Sydney in February. It's not a good idea in the north end of Halifax in February. And it's not a good idea for anyone who has a problem getting out. It also increases their carbon emissions, because now they can't just go home from work and get their mail. They have to go somewhere else. And Canada Post would probably call that a slight detour on your way home from work. But regardless of that fact, it still creates much more vehicle traffic on the road and an expensive and emissions spewing fleet to deliver. So we've been trying to convince Canada Post of the folly of their actions, and it's only the public that's going to do that, because the Conservative government, and I don't like to say the Harper government, because then we'll have this figurehead that we pin this on Harper, so then when Lisa Rowe gets in there, it'll be, well, she's a lot nicer than this one. So things must be different, but that's not the fact. It's the Conservative government and the Conservative ideology that led to this, and if we get duped again, into believing that they've changed their mind and they've become conscious people and were visited by 3 ghosts, then we're only going to get pulled down the same path all over again. So we really need the public to get on side and help us with that change. So with our proposals in regards to door-to-door, restoring that, of course, that will lessen the carbon footprint of Canada Post. Also our idea with postal banking. Postal banking, we discuss it, and it's very easy for anyone to understand how postal banking would be so advantageous in rural areas. I don't live in the city any longer. I grew up in the city, but I live in the South Shore. On Tancook Island, there is a full-service post office. It was saved by the moratorium because the residents of Tancook Island went mad and followed Gerald Kitty around everywhere he went and made sure that he promised that that post office would not close, and it's still there today. But if you want to go to a bank, or even a banking machine for that matter, and get $20, and you live on Tancook Island, you have to take an hour and 15-minute ferry ride to Chester. Then you have to walk up a hill to get to the nearest bank. Then when you get done, you have to rely on the ferry schedule to get you back. So I imagine you're going to have to find a way to while away 3 or 4 hours in Chester, then get back on the ferry and go back to Tancook Island. That's so that you can get $60 out of a bank machine, just to have some money in your pocket. It's ludicrous. The neighborhood I grew up in Halifax, when I was a boy, had a Bank of Montreal on one corner and a Royal Bank right across the street from the other corner. Neither one of them are there anymore. So this isn't just a rural issue. This is an issue with the banks turning around and creating, for lack of a better term, banking deserts, whereas whole neighborhoods no longer have them. And it's not just the most poverty-stricken neighborhoods, it's other neighborhoods as well within the city. If you've grown up here, drive down Oxford Street and see where the banks used to be near Bears Road. They're all gone. There are none left. But the post office is still on Almond Street. There are retail post offices all over the city. The opportunity for Canada Post to provide this service to people and bring back banking in neighborhoods so they don't have to travel, so they don't have to add to the carbon emissions in Canada. That is there, and it's a real possibility. Postal banking is only a foreign concept to North Americans. Everywhere else in the world, postal banking exists, thrives, and there's not a single post office in the world that does not benefit and make a profit off of postal banking. And they do not make $35 billion a year. But they do make a bit of a profit and provide a service to people without gouging them for everything they get.
How can people help in Halifax?
In Halifax, we've been talking with the MPs, and it's a political pressure. I know it's hard to believe that Canada Post is a political football. So what it is we have to have a pressure on these people, because if they believe their vested interest is to get elected again so that they can work their way to a defined benefit pension that they want to take away from us, then we have to have the public making it very clear to them that this is an issue for me. We need these services. The next time the Royal Bank wants to charge me another $2.50 for the privilege of having my money in their institution on a monthly basis, then the letters, the phone calls, and I hate to say it, but the emails should go into these members of Parliament, letting them know that it's their ass on the line, not just the post office and not just the postal workers. And that's the only way we're really going to affect change at Canada Post. During the Conservative rule, not one Conservative member missed a beat in alluding to the fact that postal workers are paid by taxpayers' money. Nothing could be further from the truth. $1.7 billion over 20 years in profits paid to the federal government from this post office. No one has paid post office workers' wages out of their taxes. It's a fact. And as Dru had said, while letter mail is eroding, it is. More so the revenue from letter mail is eroding because first class mail goes away, but addressed ad mail goes up. Canada Post can't charge you $1 for that because they're dealing with big corporations. So they charge a lot less for that. So what's gone down is the the amount of money per piece of letter mail that's written on that. But even with that being said, by their own numbers, last year Canada Post made $13 million less in transaction letter mail. Last year Canada Post made $111 million more in parcels. Almost 10 times the revenue that they lost was made up in parcels. So the stigma that postal workers have, that was brought about by the government, of course, is that we are a drain on the Canadian economy. We are a drain on the Canadian taxpayer. I'm sure if you ask the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, they will agree. But we are not a drain, and the postal services we provide are essential to those who cannot afford greater services. There are postal workers who live in areas and they cannot afford internet. They don't have internet. You can't even apply for a job nowadays unless you go on the internet. So it's very difficult. To say that this service is now totally irrelevant is just anything but the truth. And in these smaller communities where these 6,200 post offices exist, these are good jobs in a small community. They're not as good a job as being a member of parliament, but they are good jobs in a small community. If you take those post offices away from those small communities, those people have no choice but to move. Those people have no choice but to either move or commute. And what happens when you commute long distances? There goes your carbon emissions again. So it is not a positive thing for Canada Post to close these offices while it is profitable in particular. And I think we have to understand ourselves that that is the financial situation of Canada Post. And they're not going to lose money if they actually had someone in there that was running the business to try and make money. Right now, they're making money in spite of themselves. I'm sure that Mr. Chopra has nightmares about making $200 million next year, because that's not what he was put there for. So the public has to understand that initiatives such as these, initiatives such as having a post office that can provide charging stations, that can provide jobs in small communities, that can provide postal banking services, is not going to be an added cost to the taxpayer. It's going to be an added benefit to the citizens. And I know we're not consumers, even though they've been telling you that forever. We are citizens of this country. It's a crown corporation, and it's our choice what happens with this crown corporation. So I ask you to support us in our efforts to do this, and I thank the Friends of Public Service for joining with us and helping us with these initiatives.
All right, thank you. We're going to go to a Q&A, but first a few quick notes. One is that so the first thing is that I'll pass the hat to help sort of fund the existing tour, but we're also working toward a mobilization in the fall, and much like Tony was saying, what we've done is create a plan around places where the Liberals lost or won by a little bit over the NDP last time, and especially in places where they're either particularly vulnerable or particularly influential. And the idea here is that these folks tend to be a little more progressive because they're in an area where they have to compete with the NDP, but they're also a little more motivated to act on whatever progressive values they do have. So they're more likely to agree with these proposals, but they're also more likely to see their self-interest in agreeing with these proposals and pushing them forward. And so our plan is to mobilize people in those areas to get folks involved, to knock on tens of thousands of doors, ideally, in these sort of Liberal ridings and make them start to feel the heat sooner rather than later, especially around the review, so we can really get these proposals on the table. And at the same time, building grassroots power, building up our capacity to mobilize. And we will be organizing some, as soon as I get back from this tour, we will be mobilizing people across the country to take action, both in terms of creating like local letter writing parties and stuff like that. So I'm going to pass the hat. Please feel no obligation whatsoever to donate, but if you want to, here it is. And thank you very much. And in the meantime, And if folks start to trickle out, please do get a copy of Delivering Community Power before you go. So we'll take questions for either of us, and just to give you a sense of what's happening, we're going to do just a short Q&A, and then we're going to have you folks talk to each other again about what we can actually do on the ground to support the postal workers and to mobilize here in Halifax. So, questions? Yeah.
A couple of questions, if I could. You mentioned there was postal banking earlier.
Yeah.
What was that like, and why was it discontinued or eroded? The other point I'd like to make is, why aren't we looking at a change in the whole management structure of Canada? Specifically, but I'm telling you, is a workers' cooperative approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, in 1968, they reviewed the Banking Act, and so they took it away from Canada Post. When postal banking was first set up in this country, it was because the country was vast, it was underpopulated in the West, and the banks, quite frankly, didn't want to be bothered with having to serve customers over there. So the government set up postal banking. But then in '68, once the population was dense enough and things had changed, the banks wanted all the profits from that. So a lot of it was savings accounts and checking accounts. It was a simpler banking than what we're proposing right now, which would be more of a full-service bank. And I like the idea of a cooperative, but I don't think they'll agree with us on that just yet.
We can work for it.
Yes.
Other questions? Yeah.
Your comparison of the number of post offices with Tim Hortons, does your number of post offices include all those offices that are in places like Lawton's Pharmacy and the Superstore and so on?
Yeah. Yes, it does. And so
retail outlets.
Canada Post has been eroding its own post offices. So basically, it'll have a what do you call a corporate post office, which is actual post office, and then it'll open up another sort of privatized post office in a drugstore just down the street, and it'll send all the parcels there. And then lo and behold, the post office will not be doing enough business, and they'll close it down. So they've been doing this for quite a while. But my suggestion is that if they can go one way, they can go the other way. And if they and it's very profitable for drugstores to have a post office in there, because people come through and they buy all kinds of stuff. You know, I drop off a letter, end up buying a bag of peanuts on the way out or whatever. So there's all kinds of, it gets more traffic in your store. What they're allergic to is doing anything like that with existing post offices, adding additional services like banking, for example, or other things. They're unwilling to do that, and so that's why we need to change the whole direction of that and start to move back toward using these retail outlets for the public service, not just for the profits of Shoppers Drug Mart or whatever. Yeah.
The food meal concept, that's an interesting one. Back in '83, say, I was my wife and I were living up in North Manitoba, and we had something like that arranged with a supermarket in Flin Flon.
Yeah.
And although it didn't involve the mail process could fill in, it added to the system that was set up. Now that was from almost 30 years ago. Maybe a different system is in fact it is being done.
Yeah.
For northern areas.
Yeah.
Do you know anything more about the food mail concept?
Well, I know that the food mail was cut by the Conservatives. I don't know if there are other programs that exist, but maybe do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know. I don't think they tried to replace it with anything. They just simply eliminated it.
Yeah, they just added subsidies to the northern stores. That's my understanding.
Sure.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of being in Goose Bay, Labrador. I had the privilege of watching food by mail done by a postal worker, and it not only made sure that the prices were cheaper for people. It also, that postal worker went into a hangar in Goose Bay and inspected all the food. So if heads of lettuce showed up and they were rotten, or they were going to be rotten within a couple of days, that food went back. So the people actually got better produce and better things like that.
Right.
But like you say, it was canceled. We fought to keep it.
Yeah.
But the Conservatives didn't listen to us again.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And that is one of the main, the periodic protests in Nunavut, for example, around the food, the food that's available there. And one of the main complaints is that a lot of the produce is expired and rotting on the shelves. Yeah.
There is an organization that is running currently, and it has been running for a while. It's from the valley, and I know they come out as far as Manitown. And the farms actually deliver the produce to your home once a week or once every 2 weeks. You pick what you want, they bring it down, it's all fresh vegetables. But maybe they could get in on something like that and help them out. That's been going for a little while now. It's
the thing we know the least about, and we'd have to sort of crunch the numbers in terms of the business models and so on, given that Canada Post is a business that needs to turn a profit, but certainly there's a lot of possibilities that could be looked into. Yeah.
And something I wanted to add about the rural areas where they're paid on this time value, it is creating better service because people are rushing, trying to get that time value in and make the money that they're supposed to make.
Yeah.
Instead of taking the time to hold the door for somebody or return a key or return a purse that they see sitting on the side of the road. I mean, these are things that I've been doing, but a lot of them aren't doing it because they want to get that time in.
Sure.
And it's causing disservice for people.
Thanks. Suzanne?
Yeah, I just wanted to, this thing about the corporate versus private outlets. How many of the 6,200 are still owned by the Postal?
I don't know exactly. Do you know?
I don't know the exact.
I think it's around 500, but maybe don't quote me on that. Suzanne?
Yeah, Suzanne Neal, President of the Halifax Stratton District Labor Council. I'm interrupting, some of the discussion on the issues to say last time there was a postal lockout, we, along with some other community organizations, formed a local committee to do some organizing around the issue, and we are, of course, happy to help take the lead on that as well. I know there are several different organizations that are present here, and we're happy to do whatever needs to be done to support the postal workers at this time and help really amplify the message. This is a really, really fabulous campaign. So anyway, we produced a number of buttons, and as soon as we receive more button making supplies, we hope to have more out. So if you're interested in doing that, definitely don't leave before I get your contact info.
Yeah, and any future organizing we'll send out to our mailing list locally as well. So any organizations that are doing that kind of stuff, we're happy to send out a blast to let people know. Yes?
And I support all of Canada's postal workers. I'm still struggling. I have some concerns. I have one store with the post office, but why are the Canada Post Office workers there in those sort of small local stores with post offices? Why do we have the post offices and non-postal workers working them? I mean, that's ours, right? That's our Canadian workers should be working those post offices. So I'm not sure why the people who are owning and running the stores are running the post office within their stores. Also, I'm not agreeing with Canada Post's upper people. I don't know how to spell the guy's name, but he makes me crazy.
No, we refuse. We should tell them we refuse to pay their bonuses.
Yeah. Why are we supposed to be doing that when people are, having such a hard time with their money and with their lives and their jobs? We just need to get rid of them like we did Harper. So, and I'm happy that we didn't end up having the lockout as well. I mean, it begins that way, walkouts, what are we doing that for, what kind of good is that doing? We really need to sort of stop playing games and just focus in and do what we should be doing. I mean, I support the post office, period, I support them all the way. So we need to do some, brainstorming, develop some ideas, and then figure out, how we can make those Canadian post offices happen in those drugstores, those communities, those types of things, and have our workers there. I think that's the best thing to do.
Certainly have nothing to add to that. Yeah.
A large part of this seems to be involving our allies. Have you talked to anyone in the auto workers unions about, because if we have a potential of getting a large fleet of vehicles that are electric, they're going to benefit from this as well.
Yeah, so there have been talks for sure, and definitely some members of Unifor have gotten really enthusiastic about it and talked about it in the media and stuff. And we're hoping that more support materializes. Yeah.
I have, I guess, just a question and just a small comment. So I was wondering if you could say just a few more words about what Friends of Public Services actually is, sort of who's partnered in that. And then just a point I wanted to make, I work for a federal public sector union, and which doesn't dare to sort of imagine things like this, and this, my employer, is sort of consistently just kind of negotiating kind of the rate at which we lose the benefits our members have. And that kind of seems to be the limit of play. And so to actually sort of encourage people to think about public services as the things that they own and the things that they can shape and model is just an unbelievable breath of fresh air. And it seems just like a relief to come in here and hear that. But I'm curious who's sort of partnering here, because I'm like, are these people kind of on board with this, but don't dare to do this kind of thing in their own unions?
Thank you for your candor. So Friends of Public Services is an organization that was started, like I said, a year ago. It came out of Unite Against Austerity, which was sort of a more ambitious and broader scope campaign. We kind of decided we wanted to hit the ground a little more specifically, and we felt like Canada Post was actually, well, first of all, postal workers are awesome. Second of all, it's kind of, it's the one place where people have a daily interaction with their public services. If it's you don't go to a hospital every day. You maybe resent a little bit having your taxes collected, stuff like that. Not everybody's in school, but everybody's getting their mail, and so everybody has that sort of daily experience, and they notice it, and they have a relationship to it, and so it felt like a really great point of departure for starting to talk about the expansion of public services and really starting to open people's imagination, and also start to talk about the more mundane but extremely important kind of concepts of, public services are actually one of the best ways that we have to improve quality of life, and also to redistribute wealth in society. It's just a really effective way to create wealth in communities. And I think if I could add that our broader vision is really about the democratization of public services and starting to talk about how we can have public services that are run by communities and run by workers, and not run by these sort of parachuted in, highly paid EPs, of which Canada Post has 22. Who knows what they're doing? But in any case, to start to talk about community and worker co-management, and to really talk about how we can move more of our economy into the democratic sector, and start to democratize more of our daily lives, really. And so the post office seemed to be a great place to start with that. So that was the sort of inspiration. The delivering community power is really sort of a synthesis of the existing policies that CUPW has sort of put forward over the years, along with some of the sort of vision and rhetoric of the LEAP manifesto, and sort of we did some of the production. So it was kind of a collaboration in that sense between Friends of Public Services, the LEAP manifesto, and CUPW, and later and also Acorn Canada and the CPAA as well. So I think hopefully that answers your question. Maybe one more question, and then we're going to move to discussion. Yeah.
The parliamentary review is over on July 30th, and you said that you have parliamentary meetings and committees in the fall.
Yeah.
So will those meetings be based on what the results are of the review? Do you have any plans for that?
So
is there anything you can do to target?
Yeah.
If you need any help?
It's a little bit of
we could do beforehand?
complicated process. So basically what the review is doing, there's a panel that's been selected by the Liberal government that doesn't really represent the interests or the people who have anything at stake. It's like 3 people from the private sector and 1 person who was a kind of a senior bureaucrat in the prison system. It's not a metaphor. So what they're going to do is accept submissions from the public until July 30th.
Yeah.
They're going to create a discussion paper, I guess, which is then going to be submitted to Parliament and then be to sort of form the basis of debate. So it's an important phase, but it's not the only phase of the discussion. So right now, I think it's really important to submit to the review and just to say, hey, this is what we want, kind of supposed to look like. And then in the fall, I think is when we need to really hit the ground running in terms of bringing the heat to the MPs.
So that was basically my question. I'm sorry if that was misunderstood, but what's the heat that you need us to bring with that?
Organize local groups. We're going to be hopefully doing this, with whatever capacity we have. We'll be organizing everything from canvassing and this actually leads quite well into the discussion, so I'll just go over it. But there are a number of things you can do. You can write, you can grab a stack of Delivering Community Power and distribute it to your neighbors. You can hold letter writing parties targeting MPs, but also the review panel. You can organize as part of a local committee, liaising with postal workers and talking directly about what needs to happen locally. I think getting even kind of on the more ambitious end of things, we can organize tabling at public events, especially in the summertime, farmers markets, festivals, whatever. Just getting out there and talking to the public about it and making sure that people know, because they're not really getting much from the news in terms of these kind of visionary proposals. But then beyond that, I think we can start to talk about, just to establish another end of the spectrum of possibility. The idea has been floated to redecorate post offices. So pick like a particularly photogenic post office, throw some solar panels on the roof, put a sort of a mock charging station out front, have somebody park their electric car there, have somebody with a box of veggies, add the words bank to the Canada Post sign, and have a kind of festive atmosphere. Hold a press conference, take a photo, make sure that people see it, and really start to re-inscribe our imagination of what the post office could be, what this post office could actually, of the future could look like if we had the political will. So there's a range of possibilities, and we'll be sending out more on our email list, but I think it's really up to local people to figure out what's happening collectively at the local level. So that's what I'm actually hoping to discuss. Did you want to say something real quick, Tony?
Yeah, just quickly. Dan Kavanaugh, President of the Nova Scotia Federation of Labour, was sitting with me, had to leave. He asked me to, just on his behalf, say that certainly the resources of the Federation are at the disposal of the postal workers, both in this campaign and certainly throughout negotiations and afterwards. And again, he apologized he had to leave. He had to get back to Toronto for a bit this evening, but wanted to make sure folks knew that the Federation is beside the postal workers in this campaign. Similarly, just before I walked in here, about half an hour before I walked in, Gary Burrell, the leader of the Social Democratic Party, told me he had every intention of being here tonight, but called into an urgent meeting this evening. He wants me to express that that he certainly, and on behalf of his caucus, is full 100% solidarity with the postal workers, both in the expansion of services, postal banking, other services, but also certainly in negotiations, and wants folks to know that he and others will be there on the picket line if such a thing should happen. And just very quickly, a number of us from Solidarity Halifax, which I'm a member of as well, and thank you. And the Halifax Labour Council were on a conference call late last night, and until close to 11 o'clock, with folks nationally from Vancouver through to the East Coast, talking about how we can work together as progressive, militant trade unionists on a support campaign. Certainly here in 2011, I think we did a good job, and we can expand on that. We had things like, a picket line dance party with some really nice random blue lights provided by HRPD, and some other fun events last time. We need to continue that having fun as well, and whatever we can do as community members, not the labor folks and social justice allies, to support our posties.
Great, thank you. All right, so before things wind down, I'm really hoping to get people talking to each other. So